So apparently skin cancer isn't caused by the sun, because it actually might come from your diet, and this has been known for almost 40 years. So back in 1988, Australian researchers ran a study on hairless mice and exposed them to UV light, and what they found was pretty wild. So they split the mice into two groups. The same amount of calories were given to both groups, and then they also had the same amount of UV light exposure too. The only difference was the type of fat that they ate. And this is where things get really crazy, because the mice eating polyunsaturated fats, like your standard seed oils, like soybean oil and canola oil, the oil that's practically in every kind of processed food, well, they started to develop skin tumors after UV exposure. Conversely, though, the mice eating saturated fats, like butter, were completely fine. Same UV light, but no tumors. But it actually gets even more interesting, because when they looked at the protected mice, the ones eating saturated fat, and then they switched them over to seed oils, tumors started showing up. So it appears that the seed oils seem to be actively promoting cancer growth when being exposed to UV light. So based on the study, seed oils plus sun equals tumors, and then saturated fat is actually protective. And so this is just more confirmation that eating unnatural processed oils is probably a bad idea.
All right, so this guy is referring to one study from 1988 as if this is the only word on this question, and then he's misinterpreting this one study that's, decades old. There has been, decades of research since then on this same question. We have lots of data. And the question is, what is the interaction between eating different kinds of oil and the risk of developing different types of skin cancer from UV radiation? First of all, starting with the notion that UV light or the sun doesn't cause skin cancer at your diet is straight up wrong. All of this research is still requires the UV light to cause the cancer, right? Without the UV light, eating different types of fat will not give you skin cancer. It's just modifying the risk of the UV light. We also have to break down, there's three kinds of skin cancer that are researched in these studies. There's basal cell carcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma, and melanoma. And the risks for those three different types of cancer based upon different types of oil that you're eating is different. So you can't make one comment. So what has the last 40 years of research shown us about that? The results are pretty mixed. It's contentious because there isn't really a consistent signal in the data. There was a recent systematic review and meta-analysis published in 2024, so now we're getting more updated information. And it showed, a few things. First of all, it's eating a high-fat diet just overall versus a low-fat diet doesn't seem to really have much of a risk. Other studies showed there may be a very moderate risk for high fat versus low fat. And then if you break down the types of fat into the monounsaturated, like omega-3s versus polyunsaturated fats, there could be a difference for basal cell carcinoma, but it's very moderate. It's very moderate, 1.1, relative risk factor. So there's either no effect or there's a very modest increased risk from eating, a diet that's high in fat. So what to make of all this research? First of all, it doesn't mean seed oil's bad. It doesn't equate to that, or processed food bad. It in no way is equating to that. That is complete nonsense narrative. Essentially, what this means is, first of all, you should minimize your exposure to UV light, right? If you wear sunscreen, you don't have to worry about any of this, because this requires you to being exposed to too much UV light to cause the cancer in the first place. The other thing you could draw from it is just have a varied diet. Don't have a diet that's extreme, that has very, very high or very, very low in something. If you have a varied diet, there's basically no risk here. And we already know that eating omega-3s is good for you, so this is another reason why there might be a little bit of a benefit, although again, this is not completely clear in the literature, but if you take it at face value, There may be some protective, benefit in terms of the inflammatory response to the UV light. That's basically what this is all about, to, eating your omega-3s. And that's pretty much it. You don't have to avoid seed oils. You don't have to avoid processed foods. That's not going to mitigate really your risk of skin cancer. And at the end of the day, you still should just avoid overexposure to bright sunlight. That's the real, risk factor for skin cancer. We're really just talking about modifying it maybe a tiny bit at the edges.